Nice to see you all. So, what I wanted to address in this three-part series is a very big difficulty that a lot of serious spiritual aspirants struggle with, which is staying conscious of consciousness, which is staying awake. And this is something that I've been noticing for over 35 years, and I continue to notice that most people who are interested in consciousness, who are interested in enlightenment, who have a spiritual practice, tend to go in and out of being connected to their own capacity for absolute depth. And it seems very rare for human beings to reach that level of spiritual attainment where they're going in and out has come to an end in one rare people. Usually they become teachers. Not always, but most of the time become stabilized in having access to this absolute depth of their own consciousness. And as most of you, I think, know, because most of you are probably in the category that I'm speaking about. Most of you know that when you wake up, even if it's for the 1,000th time or the 10,000th time, it's always wondrous, amazing, miraculous. How could I have forgotten this? This is the most important thing. And then, for one reason or another, we fall asleep again and fall into a state of forgetfulness. And when we're awake to that dimension of ourself that's deeper than the small self, it's deeper than the frontal self, it's deeper than the ego. When we fall back to sleep, we fall back into the small self, back into the ego, and are lost in the dark night of our own ignorance once again. So the fact is that most of us need structure to remain connected to our own depth. Structure. My own guru, the great H.W.L. Punja, was not a believer in structure or practice. He transmitted with ferocious intensity what's called instant enlightenment or sudden awakening. And he had a unique capacity to wake people up like he did me. After meeting him, just spending 10 minutes with him, I had a huge wake-up experience. But he didn't believe in spiritual practice. He didn't believe in doing anything that took time, that happened in time. To stabilize yourself beyond time made any sense. So he was a transmitter, a practitioner, and an exemplar of radical enlightenment that's totally unsupported by anything that one could ever do in time. But he was an extraordinary radical character, unusual, and outrageously free. But most of us need structure in order to stay connected. This is what I wanted to address. Because the experience of inner freedom is the experience of inner freedom, and freedom itself is a state of consciousness. It's a perspective. It's a way of seeing, knowing, and understanding, and feeling. It's an experience. Freedom is an experience. It doesn't happen. It's not the result of being supported by any kind of structure. Freedom itself is unconditional. But it seems that for most of us to remain connected, even to the memory of enlightened awareness, that usually we need to be connected to a structure that values higher consciousness, the attainment of enlightened awareness, as the highest value. Because when you're with a group of people who value the evolution of consciousness more than anything else in life, then when you get together with those people, that's what you tend to focus on. That's what you tend to talk about. That's what you tend to share. And when you leave that living context where consciousness is being held as the highest value, and enter into a different kind of context where there are other values that are being shared that are held at a high level, most people tend to forget about consciousness. So after thinking about it for some time, and I've been thinking about this for a long time, I came to the conclusion that this Buddhist idea of the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, was the most ideal and most profound structure, intersubjective, spiritual structure that could help everyone in that structure to stay awake and to stay connected to the memory of enlightenment, the knowledge of enlightenment, the living knowledge that there is a miraculous truth, the knowledge of which unconditionally liberates us instantaneously, inherently, absolutely, and completely when we're conscious of it, when we're connected. So these three jewels, the idea of the three jewels of the of the enlightened master, the teachings, and the community that practices the teachings, when they work together at a very high level, I believe that they are the most profound support structure that we've come up with so far in human history to help us to maintain our capacity for spiritual enlightenment and spiritual awakeness. So what I wanted to do on these three calls was to spend a little bit of time on each one of these calls dwelling on one of the jewels and what its unique value was in the context of the three jewels together. Excuse me. So on this call, I wanted to speak a little bit about the Buddha and what the role of the Buddha plays for all of us in this support structure called the three jewels, the triple gem. So the Buddha represents, for all of us, for me, for most people, the Buddha represents the highest attainment of enlightened awareness. So when we think of what that word represents to us in our minds and in our hearts, it represents a human being who has attained the highest realization and is absolutely stabilized there. So the knowledge that any human being has reached what is understood to be, or believed, at least believed to be, the highest level of consciousness attainable, and has become stabilized there, even if that person lived 2,500 years ago, gives us confidence that enlightenment exists and that it's attainable, because the Buddha, after all, was a human being, just like you and me. He was an imperfect human being, that's what we all are. And somehow through his own efforts and his own passion and conviction, he attained profound enlightenment. And so the knowledge that he made it, that he arrived on the yonder shore, as he liked to describe it, and that he was stabilized there and catalyzed a spiritual revolution as a result, it becomes a source of inextinguishable inspiration for us. So the Buddha represents in this context the fact that enlightenment exists. And similarly, if you're a Christian, you understand that Jesus that someone like Jesus walked this earth gives one faith in the truth that he died for. So in the same way, this knowledge that there was a living human being 2,500 years ago that attained the highest level of enlightenment can inspire us to do what he did, to follow in his footsteps. So the Buddha represents enlightenment, the enlightened one, after all. And just knowing that I know I'm repeating what I said, but I'm doing it because it's important. Just knowing that he lived, that he made it, that he succeeded and that he walked this earth, in and of itself is a profound source of spiritual inspiration. And I think on the spiritual path, I think this is something to take seriously, because enlightenment is so mysterious, it's so ungraspable by the mind, it's so immaterial, it's so utterly transcendental, that it's hard to kind of get your head around what enlightenment actually is when you're not awake, to enlightened awareness. Enlightenment is a thought, not the thing itself. But some thoughts about enlightenment can be a source of can become a source of spiritual soul strength, and a source of solace, and a source of inspiration for us. And so the knowledge that another human being arrived on the yonder shore and reached the highest level of enlightenment in and of itself is enough to keep us believing in our own potential for awakening. It's one of the biggest miracles I witness all the time when I'm teaching, is I see people who are interested in enlightenment, interested in their own potential for liberation, but who don't really believe in it. They don't really believe that they got what it takes to do what he did, to go where he went, understandably. So when I see a apparently ordinary person, whatever that means, suddenly wake up to their own extraordinary spiritual potential, and as they wake up to their own extraordinary spiritual potential, they realize that potential actually exists within them, and that they have the potential to bloom spiritually, just like the Buddha did. And they experience the vibration of that potential coming alive within their hearts and minds, realizing that enlightenment is real, it's attainable, and it's an experience that is nearer than near. And that's when we start believing in our own, as I said, potential for awakening. That's when people change in the most dramatic way, even if it's a brief transformation. Seeing people wake up to their own potential for transformation in this way and believe in themselves, believe in their own spiritual potential, is inherently liberating. It's so spiritually liberating, it's so inspiring, it's so life-changing. So what the Buddha represents in this context, he represents our own enlightenment, or he represents our own potential for enlightenment. And because if you think about it, it would be hard to believe in enlightenment without the Buddha, without the enlightened one. Enlightenment wouldn't mean anything without a great realizer like him as an exemplar. So in the context of the triple gem and the structure that the triple gem represents, we cannot underestimate the need for exemplars, or an exemplar of one who has arrived on the yonder shore and who has become stable in their awakening to enlightened awareness. Because it seems that on the spiritual path, it seems that we need, this is the point of what I'm trying to say, that we need exemplars. That as much as enlightenment is about consciousness and is about the experience of a higher state of consciousness, it's also very much about being human. It's very much about the extraordinary capacities of being human and tracing into the extraordinary limitations in being human. So for most of us, this has very much been true in my case, in order to believe in our own capacity for this kind of extraordinary awakening, we need to have contact with an exemplar or exemplars who demonstrate to our satisfaction that they are in the very state of consciousness that we wish to attain, that they demonstrate a transformation on a human level that becomes palpable and tangible for us. They represent explicitly, clearly, and obviously a difference in their very being, in the very nature of their consciousness, in the very nature of the way they express their humanity, that that reveals to us that enlightenment is here. because it's being lived, it's being demonstrated, it's being embodied by a flesh and blood human being that we can see and that we can actually relate to and engage with. So we can't underestimate the overwhelming significance of having a relationship with the Buddha in real life. Now, any human being who's realized a very profound degree of enlightened awareness, one in which they become deeply stabilized and has the power to transmit this awareness to other people, plays that role for us. They play the role that the Buddha plays in the lives of all truth seekers, and all exemplars do. And it's the context of a relationship with a living Buddha, which is a living expression of enlightenment. It's engaging in the relationship with the living Buddha, or a living relationship with enlightened awareness, where we can become the most deeply touched and affected by the presence of enlightened awareness in itself in the most immediate way imaginable, infinitely more directly than just sitting on a meditation cushion by ourselves for days, weeks, months, or years, in most cases. Because a living Buddha can bring us face to face with the truth in ways that just sitting by ourselves rarely can do. And a living Buddha can challenge us at a human level, and challenge us to let go of any negative notions of self so we can liberate our own potential for greatness in ways that's very, very, very hard to do in other contexts. Because in this context, we realize our potential by letting go of any and all notions of ourself as the ego. And we need to have the courage to trust in someone who is calling us to let go of fear and let go of attachment to all these crazy small ideas about who we are. And have the courage to let go of all of them and leap into the unknown, leap into the future, leap into the glory of our own liberation here and now. And so if you can trust in a Buddha, a living Buddha, if you have the courage to trust in a living Buddha, that trust can take you all the way to the yonder shore. Now, it's important to understand that the Buddha, and the way I'm using the word, is not a human being or the human being. Enlightenment is a field of awakened awareness and intelligence. Enlightenment is a field of awakened intelligence and awareness. And that a Buddha figure, someone who's become deeply established in enlightened awareness, and whose heart has been utterly liberated from fear and self-concern, can awaken us directly to that field of liberated awareness and intelligence. Because the Buddha, while they can seem to be a human being, they're not really a human being. This Buddha consciousness manifests itself through the body-mind vehicle of a human being, but it's not the human being. It's not limited to the human being. Because if you ever have the kind of experience that I'm speaking about, if you ever awaken to enlightened awareness within yourself, or in the company of someone who's stabilized and awakened to enlightened awareness, it becomes apparent sooner or later that they have access to what's called the source of everything, the source of reality. There is, it seems, in these higher states of transcendental consciousness, transcendental awareness, it seems that there is There's a level of consciousness where we gain access to the capacity for knowing, awakened knowing, that's radically and shockingly and terrifyingly and ecstatically impersonal. And one finds oneself in that kind of state of consciousness, awakening to what's called the mind of the Buddha. But the Buddha, once again, is not a unique individual in this case. It's a field of awakened intelligence and awareness that is somehow very embedded in the very ground of reality. It is the source of reality. And in these contexts, the source of reality seems to or appears to speak to us through the body, mind, and personality of a living Buddha. But it's not the human. It's not merely the human being. It's not merely the unique individual. It's the consciousness that he or she is getting access to that's speaking through them. And this consciousness is universal in its nature. There's only one Buddha in the universe. And then that Buddha is this awakened intelligence or consciousness. And when we have our deepest spiritual insights, deepest spiritual experiences, deepest spiritual episodes, we gain access to the same universal mind, universal intelligence, universal simplicity and clarity and liberated knowing that the Buddha expresses naturally and unselfconsciously all the time. So the Buddha is not really an individual. The Buddha is a state of consciousness, or is that state of consciousness that awakens us to the very source of our own existence, the very source of reality itself. And what we find there is, as I've been saying, an awakened intelligence. There's a godlike sentience and a godlike intelligence as a source of reality that becomes self-aware through our awakenings. And that's what it means to know God, or to awaken to nirvanic self-reflective awareness, nirvanic knowing, the knowing of absolute reality, and the knowing of absolute reality, knowing the unbelievable potential there is in us human beings to create a beautiful universe, to create a perfect world, to create a world that's full of beauty and love and unimaginable grace and glory. And it all comes from the source of reality itself. That's where it's streaming from the source of reality, this inconceivable positivity and goodness, compassion, and spiritual inspiration that's utterly overwhelming. So who and what the Buddha is all these things. We all can gain access to this same awakened intelligence and spiritually liberated passion if we have the courage to let go of our own small selves and sit in the company of the Buddha himself. That's what the path is all about. So I think that a living exemplar who's stabilized in this kind of extraordinary awakening and having a relationship with such a one is the very foundation of the path to enlightenment. And I think it's important in this postmodern time that we're living in, where the Buddha's famous statement, "Be a light unto yourself," has been taken a little bit to extreme proportions. I think we need to begin to return back to the basics here and realize that enlightenment is something that happens to us and within us. We need to start looking to each other in order to find, yes, within our own self, of course, but also within each other, in order to awaken in this profound way. ideally in a spiritually realized culture, a spiritually realized Sangha. The highest form of human relationship would be when the Buddha, when the awakened Buddha within me was having a relationship with the awakened Buddha within you. So the Buddha could have a relationship with himself between us and through us. And that would be a very different kind of relationship. That would be a very different kind of human experience to have. So the Buddha represents all these things, but most of all, the Buddha represents absolute stabilization and enlightened awareness. And what it means to have landed on the yonder shore is that because the Buddha is grounded in enlightened awareness, he or she is not interested in coming back to the way things were, but is utterly and totally focused on creating the most beautiful future possible in a heavenly context where everyone has become, everybody has awakened, and now we're co-creating an awakened paradise together, paradise or heavenly realm, where consciousness has awakened to itself in and through each and every individual that's there. So we live in a magical paradise of awakened consciousness, where all that's good and beautiful is being realized and manifested through the most pure and beautiful beings that have ever existed. This is the metaphysical fantasy. It's a spiritual dream. It's a yearning of all true Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, I believe, to co-create such a heavenly realm here on earth, to create heaven on earth, to create a nirvanic world space. And when we are awake to enlightened awareness, when we are deeply awake to enlightened awareness together, it often feels like it's really possible, that it's just around the corner, that we can actually do this. One of the most extraordinary things about the state of enlightenment, the state of enlightened awareness, is inherent in it, is it's always seeking for its own self-reflection with us and through us, and seeking for the utter and unconditional liberation of its own potential, to transform samsara into nirvana. I believe this with all my heart. This is what I feel like. And those feelings are not coming from my mind, and not coming from my ego. They're coming from the best part of me. And I notice that when people wake up in the most dramatic ways, and they want everyone else to wake up, they want the whole world to wake up, they want the whole universe to become liberated and self-aware. That's an inherent aspirational desire in consciousness itself. One will discover sooner or later. And it's an aspiration that doesn't come from the small self, so because the Buddha is so utterly given over him or herself to this possibility, all they're seeing is what's possible. We just let go of our individual collective ignorance. What we want to do then is make the universe the most beautiful possible heaven realm that it could be. So having a relationship with the Buddha as an ideal and as a living exemplar awakens us to this kind of ecstatic, spiritually mad, I mean in a positive sense, aspirations. It's an aspiration to transform the whole universe into heaven realm. And these kinds of thoughts only come from the source of reality. They couldn't come from anywhere else. So the Buddha represents the highest possible expression of enlightenment. The Buddha represents the stability of enlightenment. The Buddha represents the fact that enlightenment is actually the foundation of reality itself. And the fact that the Buddha lived, the Buddhas live and walk the earth, challenge all of our materialistic conditioning and narcissistic self-obsession. because they stand forth with so much dignity and spiritual power and spiritual self-confidence that our not so subtle materialistic beliefs and narcissistic self-obsession cannot withstand the challenge of such a reflection of beauty and goodness and truth. So remember, the Buddha lived 2,500 years ago, but what he realized is timeless. Enlightenment. Enlightenment is timeless. Enlightenment didn't happen 2,500 years ago. Enlightenment is timeless and formless and beginningless and endless. It is an eternal truth. So because the Buddha was able to realize enlightened awareness and awaken to enlightened awareness, that means that you can also. And I can also. That's his challenge to all of us. And so having a relationship with everything that he represents to us consciously and unconsciously and spiritually forces us to take him and his example and his enlightenment seriously. And when we begin to take him and his example and his enlightenment seriously, then we begin to take our own enlightenment seriously. And that's the beginning of our transformation. I believe that. So the Buddha represents the goal. And so having a relationship with the goal, which is enlightenment itself, is the beginning and the end of the path. Remember, the Buddha is not the human being. The Buddha is a field of awakened awareness and intelligence that the enlightened one gains access to. So the Buddha is a state of consciousness, not a unique individual. What makes enlightenment so powerful and so challenging is that some human beings have the capacity to do it, to do it. I'm saying because I know this is something that we often think about a lot. We think about the enlightenment, it becomes very abstract. But when enlightenment awakens to itself in a profound way in another human being just like us, it becomes unmistakable and unavoidable that something very deep, profound, miraculous is happening. It becomes tangible through its expression in the other, and that's the greatest metaphysical challenge we can receive. Because a real Buddha has given up their personal life, and their life becomes an invitation for others to join them in their state of consciousness, in their liberated relationship to reality and to life itself. Real Buddhas are living for what's possible for all of us. They're living for what's possible for all of us. So their example is like an open invitation to join them in their awakening. Unless we have something better to do, that is. Most people usually have better things to do. Dharma gets burned when you realize you don't have anything better to do. But that's when things speed up really quickly in the most beautiful way. Does anybody have any questions?
If you have questions, please write them into the chat box that you find at the bottom of the Zoom window, and I will read them out. I have a question here.
Okay.
From Marjorie. She is saying, if it is true that in order to remember, one must first have forgotten, then one could perceive that there is purpose in the forgetting. Consciousness exists in both forgetting and remembering. The forgotten becomes remembrance. Yet once you remember, can you ever really forget? Does consciousness exist in the unconscious? Can we experience awareness in the mundane?
Well, that's beautiful. So, yes, it seems people can forget. They do it all the time. That was one of the reasons I'm giving this series of talks about the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, because I see that ever since I started teaching in 1986, I've been seeing people wake up, remember, and then forget, fall back to sleep. So if you say at the level of the true self, the true self never falls asleep because it's always awake. So from the perspective of the true self, no, there's no forgetfulness because the true self is always absolutely conscious and unwavering. But But in all the brokenness and the fractured natures of our egoic selves, we do a lot more forgetting than we do remembering. So yes, we can forget, and we do all the time. Most people do. That's why, as I was saying at the beginning of our time together today, that most of us need to be connected to or involved with some kind of structure, some kind of spiritual structure that will help us to stay awake, help us to remember, help us not to forget. So I was saying, not in every case. There are rare cases where it's not true, but most people need to be involved in a structure, an intersubjective structure that will help us to stay connected to the deepest dimensions of our own capacity for consciousness and our capacity for inner freedom, and connected with our deepest spiritual values. Because whenever we reawaken to consciousness, our values change once again. Oh my goodness, how could I have forgotten about this? This is the most important thing that exists. And I know I knew this before, but I forgot about it. How did I do that? I don't ever want to forget again. I'm going to join a triple gem.
Mm-hmm.
Because through association with the living Buddha, the living Dharma, and the living group of practitioners, the quest for enlightenment becomes this shared collective endeavor that gains its own momentum. And so being involved in such a context keeps us awake, helps us to keep us awake in ways that few other things can actually do.
Hello, can you hear me?
I sure can.
Yes, thank you. I apologize for my camera being off.
Okay.
I think I'm maybe, perceiving these words in a slightly different context, or maybe taking a slightly different posture or perception about these things. I'm just curious about, when we go to sleep at night, there's a sort of unconsciousness that happens within it. We kind of surrender to that. We let go of our consciousness, and we go to sleep. So, and there's purpose in that, and it's a place, an opportunity where kind of things can come into our conscious awareness if we remember the dreams, or if we remember something from that time of a consciousness sleep. And so I think I'm kind of perceiving the words of awareness and forgetting, or conscious, unconscious, of the sacred and mundane, the profound and mundane, and kind of, seeing them in sort of a polarity, but in a sense that they are both happening within this realm of being here on earth, as a human being, and that there is purpose for all of it. And, or maybe, I don't know if purpose is the right word, but just there is something about all of it that is beautiful, and that it feels as though I don't have to be 100% consciously aware, and yet I can still be aware. In other words, I can go throughout my day, I can be in relationship, I can sometimes fail as a human being. I can my humanity, is going to do within me whatever it does as a human being. I'm not always going to be perfect, and I'm not always going to be able to function 100%, from that pure place of awareness. And yet it's okay. I mean, it's
Margie, I'm not clear what you're trying to say. I can't follow.
okay.
Can you just
I
say
don't
it?
know if there's a question there. I think I'm just trying to bring in a perspective of both and
Yeah,
the
but
dance
we
between.
don't want to. But yes, that's fine. But in this context, we don't want to confuse what we could call mundane awareness with transcendental awareness.
Okay, can you speak about the difference as you perceive that?
Yeah, because the awareness when you awaken to the self or the grounded being, there is a radical there's a radical recognition of that which is ultimate, and the radical recognition, the radical awakening to that which is ultimate changes absolutely everything. And when we're aware of that which is ultimate, we know that we are, and we know who we are, we know why that we are. The mind stops having any doubt about anything important. Suddenly we feel at one with reality in a way that is utterly liberating, utterly clarifying, overwhelming in its immensity, and incomprehensible to the rational mind. And there's nothing mundane about that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So when you experience a state of consciousness that's so vivid and profound and so inherently meaningful and transformative, there's nothing mundane about it. There's nothing ordinary about it. That's when we begin to understand things that the rational mind can't begin to understand without this higher state of consciousness. And that's what enlightenment is. It's not
Yes,
as
I hear you.
it's
Yes.
not as some people say, totally ordinary. It's totally extraordinary. There's nothing ordinary about it.
Oh,
So
thank you.
sure.
I'm just wondering for myself that is there room for uncertainty within awareness?
There's room for everything.
Okay. That's what I'm perceiving also.
I know, but my point is how your ego feels doesn't make any difference. In this context, how the ego feels, what the ego thinks, good, bad, right, wrong, true, false,
Mm-hmm.
confident, insecure, it all becomes totally irrelevant. Suddenly none of it matters. Because none of it ever really did. It's a completely different way of seeing and perceiving and experiencing reality and relating to reality. It's truly absolute. But we don't want to underestimate, it's the word I'm using, liberating, it's unconditionally liberating, unconditionally liberating, unconditionally liberating. So what you're describing is how your ego might feel from one moment to the other, which is all fine and good. There's no judgment. We all have egos, and we all know what the ego feels like. But in relationship to what I'm talking about, the ego is so utterly mundane and uninteresting and unimportant in comparison to what I'm trying to share.
Well, thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, very good. Nothing personal.
I understand. Yeah, I understand
Okay.
where you're coming from. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
The next question comes from Adam. He's asking, what are you experiencing inside you in those moments of silence?
Me personally?
Yes.
You talking about it now, or?
Yes, in the last few minutes, yes.
I've been experiencing kind of a stillness, a peacefulness, a lack of self-concern. And also because I have Parkinson's disease, I've been experiencing an annoying shaking in my body, which is very distracting. That's what I've been experiencing.
Thank you.
But mainly I'm feeling the presence of an open space that feels infinite, a lack of self-consciousness, feeling very peaceful and very trusting, no fear, no doubt, no worry. How's that sound? Pretty good?
Very good. The one thing I just want to add to it, I remember something that Ken Wilber said. He was saying he was making a distinction between states of consciousness and the permanent trait. So for you, is this something to come to the point where it's not just intermittent, it's a permanent trait where you're there most of the time?
It depends upon what else is happening in my life. So whenever I focus on this, it's always right there, but I'm not always focused on this.
Right, I see.
But if you would get to know me, people who get to know me find that at the deepest level there's a tremendous stability that I'm never distracted from this. I always know who I am, what's most important, and I never forget that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Whereas I might experience different states of consciousness, some deeper than others, and at times more mundane states of consciousness. I'm always there and ready to be here. I never need to be reminded of what's most important.
Mm. Right.
So my guru said to me, and I often repeat this when I'm teaching, because a lot of people think that that a stable attainment of enlightened awareness would be the presence of a particular state, a particular feeling all the time. Right? That's what you're asking about.
Yes.
The presence of peace, the presence of a vibration of being, etc. Some spiritual kind of feeling, or so rather,
Yeah.
the feeling of peace that passeth all understanding. And this just is not true. A lot of people get very hung up because then what happens is then when people who believe that think that when people who believe that feel peaceful, feel the vibration of being, they say, "Oh, this is it. This is it. Now this is the thing. This is what God is." But when they don't feel it, and they're not, for some reason they're not feeling that vibration, not feeling peaceful, the mind is agitated. They feel, "Oh no, I've lost it." So they make enlightenment, which is not an object, into a mind object.
Mm.
And enlightenment is not a mind object. It can't be found anywhere with the mind. It can't be located. It doesn't exist here or there. It's not a feeling. So the problem is when we associate enlightenment with feeling states, particularly the feeling states become an obstacle to the thing itself. So my guru told me, he told me that the difference between enlightenment and unenlightenment is doubt.
Mm.
So in other words, he made clear to me that when you become stabilized in enlightened awareness, you'll have no doubt.
Mm.
He didn't say you'll always feel a particular way. He said you'll have no doubt. To repeat, he didn't say he'll always feel a particular way. So when your enlightenment is no longer dependent upon feeling any particular way, but on the absence of doubt, it changes the ball game. It means that we never have an excuse not to be enlightened.
Right.
Even if we don't feel peaceful, for example, or even if we're feeling anxious for whatever reason, there's all kinds of causes and conditions that will affect our emotional states, from mundane things to to very challenging personal issues. There's all kinds of things that can shake us up emotionally. But none of that needs to mean anything about the deepest state, the deepest state of consciousness, and the deepest truth about who we are. So if we have no doubt, and I'm saying most people do have doubt. Only people that become very, very stabilized have no doubt. And the reason I have a lot of spiritual self-confidence, people who get to know me, they realize that I have a lot of spiritual self-confidence. I have that spiritual self-confidence not because I'm in a particular state of consciousness all the time. It's because I have no doubt about who I am and about what the ultimate truth is. In that I never waver. And then I realized that my guru, was right. This is really about not having any doubt. That has nothing to do with the presence or absence of any particular state of consciousness, because he's talking about a deeper state of freedom that's not dependent upon any particular state of consciousness. Now, what happens is, interestingly, which is that if we can let go of doubt in just the way that I'm trying to describe to you, it just so happens that you will experience these deeper and higher states of consciousness much more often and for longer periods of time than most people do.
Yeah.
That'll be the gift that you receive as a result of being doubtless about who you are, which is more and more constant experiences of higher and deeper states of consciousness. But one won't be grasping at these higher states like it's a material objects. And one won't be drawing any conclusion about that they necessarily mean anything. In other words, a lot of people think, well, if my mind is quiet, it means something about me. If my mind is agitated, it means something about me. You realize that nothing that happens in the mind means anything about who you really are. Nothing that happens in the mind means anything about who you truly are. And if you know that, it doesn't matter what's happening. And it also gives us enormous room to be fully human, to embrace the full complexity of being human, including our fears and insecurities and frustrations and all kinds of suffering for all different reasons, and still be doubtless about who we are. Of course, if the thing is, if you are truly awake in the way that I'm speaking about, the result should be a much deeper state of happiness than most people experience. But it's not really happiness. It's what I call it's spiritual self-confidence. I like to speak about it that way. Spiritual self-confidence, being confident in who you really are. And if you have spiritual self-confidence, you'll express it in the way you behave. It means there's something that you know and that you don't have. There's something that you know, and in this I'm being very bold. There's something that you know. What you know is the ultimate truth about the nature of reality, which is quite a bold thing to say. And you know that you know it. And you know that you know it in a way that your own mind can't even understand, but you have no doubt about it. And nothing that you can experience in relative reality, nothing that your body, mind, or personality can experience in relative reality could convince you of anything different. You become doubtless. And that doubtlessness is this stability, becomes the source of stability for your enlightenment, for your awakening. And if it's for real, other people are going to notice it. So please have the courage to let go of the belief that enlightenment is a feeling. Because if enlightenment is a feeling, we make it into something. So because enlightenment includes everything, but it transcends everything. And it's the transcends everything part that's the most interesting. So the mind that hasn't transcended anything can't understand this part of it. that make sense to you?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, what you're saying is to have no doubt, and anything that my mind asks you about what the meaning of something is has absolutely no meaning. I understand that. Yes, that's great.
Well, in the context of enlightenment, there's all kinds of things where the meaning is important, but we're trying to say that the mind cannot understand what enlightenment is because it's a mystery that exists beyond the mind.
Yes.
And just to repeat, enlightenment is not a feeling. The awakening to enlightened awareness will bring with it experiences of bliss and ecstasy, joy, and happiness that are unimaginable. But they're the products of enlightenment. They're not the enlightenment itself.
Are you ready for the next question, Andrew?
Yep.
It's coming from Carrie. She is asking, is the guru an outer guru or an inner guru or both?
Both. Carrie, I don't know if you've ever seen my first book. The title of my first book is called My Master is Myself.
No, I haven't read that one.
That's the answer to your question. It's called My Master is Myself.
Oh, okay. Yes.
That's the answer to your question.
Yeah. You talk about perfection and how enlightenment is the ultimate perfection is perfection. In ordinary life, perfectionism is a source of great suffering. In order to help people, if you're in a teaching position, do not have to understand where we're all in our separate states of development and karma. And in order to help somebody come out of suffering or come out of there, how do you help them?
Well, the way we help them is by demonstrating a confidence in the ultimate truth. And the ultimate truth is that things are okay. The ultimate truth is that things are okay.
How do you resonate with their inner guru to lift them out? Do you not have to go to their place?
I never do that. I can't help it.
I know you don't.
No, Gary, slow down. I can only help people if people meet me where I am. So I encourage people to come up to my level. When they do that, they start feeling better right away. So I never meet people where they are. I always insist lovingly that people meet me where I am, because where I am, if they meet me where I am, their problems will disappear temporarily, at least. They'll evaporate temporarily. And they'll go, oh, this is a completely different perspective. This is a completely different way to see reality. It's a completely different context of meaning and existence. Now I know what he's talking about. So when people meet me where I am, their perspective changes and their state of consciousness changes and their intellect becomes well ordered. Remember, I'm not a psychologist.
Well, you understand things about psychology.
I know. No, it's true, but I'm not a psychologist, so I only have one remedy. I have a one-size-fits-all teachings for all human beings.
So if you're bringing somebody to an experience of awakening, I had a slight experience a couple of weeks ago where I kind of, it was a bodily experience, but it was also in my mind, where a door opened and there was all this light. And then I heard a voice said Dharma in my mind, and I closed the door. I didn't go through and into the light. And I thought, why did I resist going through? And there were two things that came up. One was I didn't want to go crazy, and the second one was I wanted to honor the Bodhisattva vow and not become enlightened before I brought all other living beings to enlightenment. So
Well,
that
no, that's beautiful. But next time, why don't you enter the light and see what God has in store for you?
yeah,
I think
that's
you'll be a much more powerful bodhisattva if you do it that way than waiting around.
okay. It took me about 2 days to really realize that I should have taken the risk and gone through.
It's okay. There'll be next time. Next
Yeah.
time you'll be ready.
Yeah. Thank you.
Nice to see you, Carrie.
Okay.
The next question, Andrew, is from Tanya. And she says, what would be the function of life once everyone is awakened? As for now, big part of the motivation to live is to alleviate suffering, whether one's own or collectively. But what then when there is no more self-caused suffering and when we all know who we are? Have you envisioned how life would look like then? I want to be able to envision that. Thank you for the presentation today. Apologies for not being able to have my camera on.
Well, Tanya, there's two different ways to understand enlightenment. One is to come to the end of suffering. But there's a new and emerging understanding for the context of enlightenment, and that has to do with evolution, or the evolution of consciousness. And evolution happens when greater complexity emerges from lesser complexity. So after we come to the end of our own personal suffering, in the context of the awakening to enlightened awareness, we become interested in the evolution of consciousness, the evolution of the interior of the cosmos. The interior of the cosmos, the interior of the universe is sentience or subjectivity or interiority, and the interiority or the inside of the universe is trying to evolve, trying to become more conscious, trying to become more complex, more sensitive, more intelligent, more extraordinary, more profound, more miraculous. So once we solve the problem of our own personal suffering, then we can focus ourselves and dedicate ourselves to the evolution of the interior of the universe. And the evolution of the interior of the universe is a infinite aspiration. It comes from the energy and intelligence that created the universe in the first place, or to use mythic language, from God. So, using this mythic language, God's trying to evolve also. So once we've solved the problem with our own suffering, then we would come to that point where we want to use the gift of our own life to help God evolve through us. And that's quite a big commitment. So of course, first we have to solve the problem of our own suffering. But once we've done that, then we want to take on this challenge of the evolution of the interior of the cosmos for the foreseeable future, and that should help to change everything in the long run. How does that sound?
Yeah, how would life look like after that?
An exciting adventure that was going to last forever.
That's really something that I would like to be able to envision.
Very good. Well, yeah, well.
And I don't see any text or anything discussing this almost at all.
Well, I wrote a book called Evolutionary Enlightenment. It's called Evolutionary Enlightenment. Evolutionary Enlightenment. And it's all about this It's all about what I just described. Very clear language.
But what would we do after? Like when
There is no after. There is no after. There's only forever. There is
do
no
you
after.
do you believe that that is the state that we can achieve as a humanity, that everyone is awakened?
Not anytime soon, no.
But for a long
Oh
time.
yeah, yeah, sure, sure. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think it would be really, really valuable to be able to really see that or imagine that, because it's like a pointer to actualization.
Exactly, Tanya. And the more of us that are imagining this glorious possibility for humanity are carrying this feeling or this thought or this vision of the possible for all of humanity, for ourselves and for all of humanity, that is purely positive. And that's the medicine we all need to take right now. Is carrying that vision of the possible that's purely positive. It's about the evolution of consciousness for all sentient life, and in our case for humanity, as the source of spiritual inspiration and spiritual positivity and spiritual self-confidence. Absolutely, yes. So this is what I'm trying to do with this teaching, with this work, is to turn people on and to awaken people to this perspective so that people can become exemplars of the possible and beacons of the possible.
Yeah, and I do believe that it's possible that everyone is one day awakened. And I have my placeholder there. So thank you.
Very good. Very, very good. You're keep that placeholder there for all of us. Keep it for me too. Yeah, but what's beautiful, Tanya, is that you care so much, and that's what I'm speaking about. That you care that much about all of us, and that's real spiritual inspiration. It's the kind of inspiration we all need. Is to care for everyone else and to care about the human project and the life project on Earth for its own sake. To care about what's possible, not just because of all the things that seem to be going so terribly wrong right now, but because of what can go so terribly right, because of the goodness, truth, and beauty, and the glory of God that's at the very center of all this. That's driving the whole process. This miraculous energy and intelligence that I was describing before as the mind of the Buddha. It's the awakening to that, and when we awaken to that, we begin to express that, manifest that through our own personality, and that's what helps to inspire other people.
This was the last question, Andrew.
So that's well. Thank you. So I've enjoyed this our time together, and I realized that speaking about the Buddha, or in this way, is a little bit provocative. But I wanted to take the risk. I'm glad I did. So I hope to see you all in 2 weeks, and we'll continue this discussion of the triple gem or the three jewels. And next time we'll talk about the Dharma and the significance of the Dharma in this miraculous spiritual structure called the triple gem of the three jewels, that I believe is the ultimate vehicle